Hello, hello. Welcome, please come in. It is time to resume our White Mage only journey this week in Final Fantasy XII. No, not FF5. We'll get to it. But for now, it's FF12. Just like other series, this will end in FF12 because it is the most recent, non-MMO, mainline Final Fantasy game with a job class system. Albeit a bit different given that it was tacked over the prior license board system from the original. And this invites some weirdness in how the classes are structured, but I will be running into similar problems of prior games. First and foremost is that White Mages don't have any damage-dealing magic, and while their weapon is strength-based, and can hit flying units, its attack bonus is bad. So bad, it's just awful most of the time. But let's see how well the comparatively adaptable systems of FF12 can help cover for White Mage's weaknesses. Into the story. Rex has a bad day, Phon hunts a tomato, and I'm out in the Giza Plains to get a sunstone. Buy Cure, which means I can now heal, and Penelo joins up. I can't buy any rods yet in the challenge, which means I'm stuck with the basic daggers, which is honestly probably better. This means my damage isn't yet awful, as daggers are the intended weapon at this point in the game. Sunstone acquired, it's time to crash a party. Shouting puzzle done, and Balthier and Fran join the party. Still no rods, so the party must stick with the default weapon. Which again, is fine. First boss, some slimes. Fran can cast fire while Amalia can deal actual damage, and I reach the first moat farming excursion. This chest, right by a load zone, has a chance of having a dark moat in it. I haven't really talked about moats in prior runs because they aren't usually super important. However, the ability to use the moat to cast a spell I won't otherwise have access to is very useful. Particularly on a class like White Mage, which has high magic, but no attacking spells. These moats will drop off later as I reach the points in the game where I would normally gain access to the spells in question, but a handful of dark moats can be very useful. Fire main fight time, and this fight is pretty easy. My characters have the same weapons they likely would normally have in a playthrough, or at least on the same level, and I have considerably more healing since my entire party can cast Cure. Party is captured, then escaped, and it's time for the Nalbina dungeons. There are moats in this area that have a chance of spawning, but they can't be farmed because you can't reload this area. And I could reload a save, but none of the moats here are that useful. Into Barheim. Turn on the lights, and it's next shop time. And I can escape the rods no longer. It's time to buy some rods and equip the entire party. Good news is that they are stronger than prior weapons I had. Bad news is they are not as good as the other weapons you can buy at this point. Hooray! Barheim Passage itself isn't that interesting. I have functionally infinite healing, so survivability isn't an issue. And while it takes longer to kill the power-sapping mimics, the undead that spawn in the dark are the only thing that White Mages are actually good at dealing with. Is it difficult? No. Does it take a while? Yes. Time for the next boss fight, the Mimic Queen, which can spawn little mimics to drain power, and my damage wouldn't be very good, but this is what I gathered up those dark motes for. Mimic Queen isn't weak to dark, but it is a pretty good spell at this point in the game, and it can hit in an area. Bosch joins the party, and he gets to replace Fran. His magic stat is awful, but his high strength will help make my damage less awful. Fly to Bougerba, where I can buy my first buffs, Protect and Shell. Considering how low my damage output is going to remain throughout the run, more survivability is great. And it's Lusu Mines. Lamont joins the party, which means a bit more damage and healing. I do spend a bit of time killing undead for XP and gold, but while my damage is good against undead, I don't actually have enough MP to really do this. And it's probably just not worth the time. This area has no boss, so it's time to bail. Another shouting puzzle, and it's time to explore the Leviathan. Vossler joins the party as a guest, which is very much appreciated. And I bought some new rods to boost my damage. It's still not good, but it's definitely better. And it's next boss fight. A room full of dudes, which is fine. Vossler may be the only person dealing decent damage, but honestly he could probably solo this fight. Here I recruit Ash to replace Balthier. She has the highest magic stat and will be my third party member. Debatable whether that high magic stat is actually needed considering how great my healing already is, but hey, gotta have one dedicated mage. Back through the ship, and it's proper boss time. I start by throwing out some arrow motes to clear out the guards, and then just bash down geese. This is my first opportunity to use Protect and Shell, and the increase in durability is definitely noticeable. That done, I'm in the Wester Sand to buy some new armor and start the trek through the Sand Seas. The Sand Seas are, as ever, not particularly interesting. There aren't even any items in chests here to try and get lucky with and then get bored and give up on. So it's on to the next boss, Garuda. Rods may not have a lot going for them in this game, but one thing they do have is that they can hit flying enemies. Even if they couldn't, Vossler has telekinesis letting him hit Garuda. My damage is trash, but I still win the fight. The shop now sells a new rod. Unfortunately, it's the healing rod, which deals trash damage and inflicts regen. Theoretically useful to inflict a positive status on an ally at no cost, but positive status effects are not actually my problem. My problem is the next boss fight against the Demon Wall. This fight is normally pretty forgettable. Unfortunately, it is also a boss with a time limit. The Demon Wall continually advances forward, and if it reaches the end of the bridge, that's game over. It also likes to inflict blind on my entire party, drastically hindering my attacks until cured. And X-Zone, which just removes one party member from the field for the rest of the fight. First attempt goes pretty bad, with the boss still having about a fifth of its HP left. Second attempt, I try throwing out some motes to finish the fight, but my entire party gets put to sleep before I can. Okay, much as I'd love to throw myself at a wall 500 times, I think it's time to get into some more random encounters around the Sand Sea to get a level or two. I'm close, so it shouldn't take too much, but I need just a little bump in my damage. Couple levels gained, and it's back into the fight. Levels mean less in this game than actual equipment, but it does make a bit of a difference. The Demon Wall using a null to remove my MP doesn't help, but one shock mote deals big damage and leaves me with just enough time to win the fight. That Demon Wall is basically never a problem, so that's a new one. Through the Tomb of Wraithwall, I get Dispel. A lot of the big bosses in this game have buffs they can either cast on themselves, or just already in effect at the start of the fight. Being able to dispel those consistently is actually a pretty big deal. And it's next boss time. Time for the first Esper, Belias. Start by buffing my defenses, then just smacking Belias. Partway through the fight, he gets Protect and Shell cast on him, so I dispel that immediately. Thanks to my healing and high defenses, Belias can't really deal any significant damage, even with Phyraja, although I probably should have bought some handkerchiefs. Belias done, it's time for another boss fight, this time against Vossler. This fight has proven to be a bit difficult in other solo class runs. He starts off pretty easy to manage, but he really starts to combo attacks at low health, and has demonstrated pretty consistently that he can take a character from max HP to 0 in one string of attacks. First up is some motes to take out his lackeys, then dispel his buffs. Vossler will recast Reflect, but that's actually fine. I set up a gambit so Phon is constantly dispelling Reflect. Anytime Vossler spends recasting Reflect on himself is time he isn't killing my party. Vossler goes down, and it's actually way easier than normal. Now that the Tomb of Wraithwall is completed, it's time for a side adventure. I head over to Nalbina and take a chocobo to scare away these guards. This lets me access the Mossforan High Wastes early. The enemies here are way too strong for me to deal with, but accessing this area now means I can easily head into the northern section of the Ester Sand, which lets me get the Berserker Bracers, which is the first item to really give me a big damage boost. These apply Berserk to the person equipping them, in my case Bosch, and so long as Bosch is berserked, his damage is boosted by 50% and the speed his ATB gauge filled is doubled, which is a very nice damage buff. But now it's time to head through the Giza Plains wet. Normally I just run straight through this area, but I actually have something I need to do here, and that is knock over these trees. This lets me access this hidden-ish area. Much like the Mossforan highways, the enemies here are way too strong for me to fight. However, there are a few treasure chests I can access without fighting anything. These respawn and have a chance to have a very strong mote selection. Aquera, which hits all enemies for water damage, and shock motes, which are endgame black magic that will be very useful to deal big damage. These motes will be almost completely useless by endgame, but for now, these are spells I can't normally access. The other chest also has Magorokus, which are pretty good katanas. I can't equip them, but they do sell for a decent amount of money. Oh, and High Ethers, which will let me easily restore MP when I need to. Consumables successfully farmed, it's time to move on to the Osmond Plains and Jahara. Here, Larsa rejoins the party to give some nice bonus damage for the next bit of the game. Love that. Into the Yarut village to get our next quest. But first, new rod just dropped. It is Earth Elemental, which is a bit of a double-edged sword, but also provides 18 more attack than my existing rods. Fran's sister is missing, so it's time to head to the Hen Mines. Nothing too interesting here. There are some decent motes that I could spend time gathering, but none are unique enough to really bother or close enough to load zones. And it's boss time. Tiamat loves using Disablega, requiring me to spread out my characters, but that's really its only interesting trick. I can heal forever, more or less, so this fight takes a while, but isn't particularly challenging. That kind of feels like a good summary of every White Mage only run, actually. Anyway, time to continue east, and it's next boss time. The considerably more dangerous Elder Worm. The Elder Worm starts with 2 allies who aren't too difficult to defeat, then a quick Dispel to remove its buffs, then it uses Sporefall, which inflicts a comical number of status effects on the entire party. This is actually one of the harder fights in the game. And this run. I have Asuna to cure status effects, but that has limited use when my party keeps getting afflicted. I start to control one character to keep them out of the AoE, so at least someone can still cure statuses. But because my damage is so awful, the Elder Worm gets to use Sporefall way more than it usually would. In most playthroughs, you would probably see it once, maybe twice, depending on your damage. But I'm pretty sure the Elder Worm got to use Sporefall 5 times. Alright, that mess done, let's keep going. Into the Paramina Rift and on to Mount Baramises, which doesn't have anything that exciting, but it's time to head south to the Still Shrine. Mostly this dungeon is just kind of tedious. My damage isn't increasing nearly as fast as I want, so every fight takes a very long time. I finally reached my favorite grinding spot, this area where only undead spawn, and even that is a disappointment. I mean, sure, my cure spells deal great damage, but they are also so expensive, so I can't use them consistently. I keep running out of MP. This sucks. Let's try the boss fight. Yeah, this is better. Venuskar has a magnetic field, which doesn't impact me at all, and while my damage isn't great, Venuskar also doesn't deal that much damage. So Berserked Bosch can pretty easily beat the boss down. I mean, this boss is pretty easy to beat anyway, and my game crashed. Well, at least this is an easy boss fight to have to redo. Ooh, Sage Ring. This goes on Ash to have MP costs. And it's time for the fight against Marius. I will say it took longer than it should have to realize the Ice Azers are immune to earth damage. Real unfortunate that I sold all my other rods. My only saving grace is that I picked up an Amber Armlet earlier. These function like the Brawler license, allowing you to deal better damage with unarmed attacks. It should be noted that better is still not good by any stretch. It's actually considerably weaker than even basic rod attacks, but that's kind of all I've got for these Azer. Once they drop, I can switch back to Berserker Bracer and rod damage, which is way better. Still not good though. Marius tries to do decent damage, but a combination of Shell, Protect, and Regen means their attacks aren't too bad. At low health, Marius does finally start to attack more aggressively, but a quick shock mode at the end wins the fight. That is 2 espers down. If only either esper unlocked anything interesting for white mages. Marius down, so it's time to head back to Mount Baramises. Here I can buy power rods to further boost my damage and no longer have to worry about elemental immunities. And it's time for another boss fight, this time against Judge Bergen. First move is to throw out some Aquara motes to take out Bergen's ads, then keep my HP as high as possible to survive until Bergen is at low HP, and throw out a shock mote to finish off the fight. Okay, that fight can be a bit messy, but that wasn't too bad. And I'm out of teleport stones because I sold the few I had by accident, so I guess I'll take a chocobo back to Rabanastre? I don't think I've ever had to do that. Now I can take a leisure aircraft to Nalbina to buy all the teleport stones I'll ever need, which is honestly probably like 20, but I buy 99 anyway. And now it's time to head into the Mossforan High Waste properly. I'm now strong enough to actually fight the wolves here, and it's time to do some more laps to get some more motes, because looping around this area can get me some bio-motes, and some more katanas to sell for money. Nothing else really interesting in the highway, so it's time for the Salika Wood. And the Salika Wood also doesn't really have any items I want to go out of my way for, so it's time for the Phon Coast, which is actually the first area of the game where I really start to feel my low damage. Not because I'm taking out enemies slowly, I mean, I am, but because I'm taking out enemies so slowly enough that I risk getting swarmed. I almost lost my entire party due to this against random enemies. Okay, I'm gonna need to be way more careful, but I reached the Phon Coast shop, which sells better armor and better rods for very slightly higher damage. I can't wait to get holy. I need more damage in this game. Okay, I've been LP poor for long enough. Time to do some trial mode LP grinding, which does take longer than I'd hoped because my damage is so low. Alright, back to the Phon Coast to continue on my way, and into the Tichita Uplands. Here I get the hunt that opens up the path through the next area. And that means next boss time, and it's the Tomato family. These enemies run around evading attacks and inflicting a lot of statuses. And just like every boss that inflicts a lot of statuses, they kind of suck to fight, slowing down my party, putting me to sleep, then killing someone and running off. The good news is none of them are actually that durable, and while I don't have a ton of area attacks, I do have the Aquara motes I picked up earlier. And shock motes, for when I get tired of being in this fight and really just want these stupid tomatoes to die. And next boss, Ahriman, which also inflicts status effects and can be real obnoxious. The only good thing is it is also an undead enemy, meaning I can use white magic to actually deal really good damage. And though it can summon duplicates, Cura can deal great damage and destroy the clones. That's probably one of the easier fights against this boss I've had. And it's Arcades time. Here I can buy some better armor, though not any better weaponry, and buy a full stock of Bacchus' cider. This item bestows Berserk on the user. I don't need these quite yet since I have the Berserker Bracer, but I will want them shortly. Draklore Laboratories. This area has a bunch of different modes I can quickly farm via transitions. It also has enemies that show up in decent-sized groups that I need to be very careful around. Because yeah, it turns out they will body my entire team if I'm not careful. This room alone gives me Erogamotes and Biomotes. I actually don't know that I end up using these Biomotes, but I know I use the Erogamotes in a bit. Motes acquired, time to move on to the boss fight against Dr. Sid. He starts the fight invulnerable. I take off the Berserker Bracers so that Bosch can actually target one rook consistently, so I'm not just wasting turns. But once the rooks are down, it's back to Berserk, and that's really all it takes. This fight is always incredibly easy to beat, even without any real offensive capability. I've now reached Balfenheim. I don't have any money though, so no reason to stop by the shops. Instead, it's time to head to the Golmore Jungle, and then into the Feywild. Here is the best grinding spot in the game, but it does get a bit better if I can beat the first boss here, Reflescia, which is always a bit of a mess. The fight arena saps MP, the boss inflicts disease, and it summons ads. This probably should be a no-go, but thankfully my old friend Motes saves the day. My party ends the fight at 1 HP and diseased, but thanks to spamming Erogamotes, the fight is still actually a victory. This lets me very easily reset the Mirror Knight enemies to grind out a whole bunch of loot to sell for Gil. That done, I can continue through the Feywild, and my goodness, our enemies taking just forever to die. I thought Time Mage would be bad, but these enemies are just taking so little damage, especially the behemoths. They're weak to ice, but I have no way to deal ice damage, even a little bit. This also means enemies have a lot more time to deal big damage to my party. I can't believe I have to use defensive buffs to survive random enemies. This is so sad. But it's enough to get me through the Feywild and into Giruvegan. I'm not especially looking forward to the next sequence of bosses, though. But first a trip back to Balfenheim to sell off loot and buy Curaja and some new armor. Still no new weapons, though. And now it's time for some side questing. I usually avoid doing anything outside the critical path, mostly because they take more time than they are worth to complete when I'm putting out a new video at least once a week. But with how comparatively weak white mages are at dealing damage, I'm gonna need a few things. First is to do some hunts. Most of the actual useful rewards at this point would take way too long to unlock, but I can do enough to unlock the Encalados hunt, which gives a golden amulet to double LP. Was this faster than just doing 2 runs through the trial mode? No. Then I did even more hunts? Why? Let's find out together, because I have no idea. Okay, then we skip straight to failing to kill the Bomb King. I script these videos within a week of recording the footage, and it is really shocking to me how much I forget about anything I do. After grinding up some LP, it's back into the Bomb King fight, now with full quickenings. It takes a couple tries to get the timing right, but eventually I manage to trigger a quickening sequence and get enough triggers off to finish off the Bomb King. This opens up the way to Nabrius. Now, this area is way higher level than I should be dealing with. Even the undead are fairly tanky, and I can hit them with Curaja. But I am not here to fight. Rather, I'm here to loot the place as best I can, because there are things here that I want. There are some good armor pieces here, but those aren't what I'm after either. There it is, Bravery. Another offensive buff that boosts physical damage by 30%. Then Protectka, which is just Protect, but on the entire party, drastically improving the speed I can buff my defenses. And finally, a pair of Hermes sandals. Actually getting out of the Necro Hall is a bit of a struggle because I can't see any of the traps, but I just barely manage it. Now that I have these few items, my big offensive strategy is assembled. I can equip Hermes sandals on Bosch so he always benefits from haste, then use Bacchus cider to gain the benefits of Berserk, which stack. And finally, a little bit of bravery to boost my damage even more. And I equip Phon with the Bubble Belt as he will be filling the role of tank for the rest of the game by having twice as much health as anyone else. Alright, time to get back to the plot. And it starts with Daedalus, who is pretty easy to beat down, but also hits like a truck in the last phase of the fight. As evidenced by, this. My main party does go down, but I can switch into the B team to use some Phoenix Downs, then switch back and unleash a quickening sequence to end the fight. Okay, first try, way better than I'd expected. And then into Giruvegan proper. The enemies here take way more hits than I'm used to, because even after all that buffing, my damage is still very bad. This mostly just means I need to be really careful to only fight 1 or 2 enemies at a time. I just kill things so slowly that I can't afford to get swarmed. Next boss time, Tyrant. Start with the spell as usual to remove the boss's buffs. Then basically just attack for a while. Tyrant is durable, but isn't actually all that dangerous. I do try to end the fight early with quickenings, but I do a bad job. Fortunately, this boss is still more of a hindrance than an actual threat. And into the Great Crystal. This place is samey as ever, but I do pick up the Holy Rod, the best rod I will get access to, so that's another boost to Bosch's damage. Though this time I will be sure to hang on to an Imperium Rod in the event I run into something that interacts with Holy in a way that isn't in my favor. And good thing too, because the very next boss is Shemhazai. Wait, when did I buy Decoy? Is that why I did the extra hunts? Not a bad plan, me. This means Phon can tank even more effectively by having the lure status constantly, which does big work against Shemhazai. Flare can nearly one-shot Phon, who has twice as much HP as everyone else, so it would definitely kill anyone else. And while Shemhazai unleashes some pretty dangerous spells, a short quickening chain at the end can take out the last of its HP. Treaty Blade acquired, time to head back to Balfenheim to recruit Redis. Ooh, and I can buy a Rise. That's great. Next stop is the Pharos, but let's delay a bit and do some more trial mode to get some extra LP. And it's time for the Pharos. My damage is still meh, and swarms of enemies can absolutely devastate me, but I'm ready. 2 prizes are waiting here, and both are gonna be game changers. But the bosses are why we're here, and first up is Hydro. This fight is a boss that always goes really well, and then goes really badly. As in this case, where he manages to completely destroy my entire party. I do manage to do some switching around shenanigans to get Phon back up to do a quickening string of honestly surprising duration, given he was the only character left alive. Honestly, I assumed that fight was lost, but alright, gonna need the future fights to go just way better than that going forward. One nice thing about this place is that a lot of enemies here are weak to Holy, which means Bosch's very boosted attacks are dealing even more damage. Next boss time, Pandaemonium, who is immune to Holy damage, so that didn't last long. Time to switch to... Did they buff the Treaty Blade? I thought this thing had like 30 attack in the original. Well, that's kind of embarrassing. Probably didn't matter in any other run I've done, just not gonna think about all the misses in Time Mages only. It also has 30 evasion? What is this? Did they buff the Treaty Blade to be useful to me, specifically in this run? Because, yeah, no, it is. The Holy Rod deals more damage in some cases because enemies are weak to Holy, but otherwise looks like it'll just be me using the Treaty Blade going forward. And here is my first prize. By killing the Daedars, I can create an extra red bridge here. This opens the path to the greatest spell, Holy, which, spoiler, I don't actually really use at all. I mean, I've more or less built my party around Bosch's physical attacks, Phon tanking and buffing, and Ash healing. So now that I finally have Holy, I just don't use it. Also, I may have forgot to buy the Gambit that lets you target enemies with Reflect so I can regularly attack them, and Holy is reflectable, so I'd have to manually select Holy every time I wanted to use it until I get to a shop, which means it will be too late for Holy to be useful, for another reason we'll get to. Excuses out of the way, it's time for the next boss, Slight, who hits like a truck and progressively hits like larger variants of trucks as the fight goes on. Too bad I have Protectka, Bubble Belt, and Lure. Even its longest strings of attacks isn't enough to bring down Phon, and that's another boss out of the way. We're pushing this train forward at full speed. Next boss time, Fenrir. Same strategy as before, all the buffs in the world, both offensive and defensive. Then tank hits and a quick dispel. Fenrir goes down very quickly and very easily, as usual. And then Ashmal. Start by casting Float via Moat to negate his earth attacks. Why do I only have one float moat? How did I grind out so many moats and forget to make sure I got any float moats? Well, too late now. Let's dive in. And Ashmal is no joke. He has strong attacks, even if I could negate all his earth attacks, and he loves to inflict disease. However, Phon has over 5,000 HP and lure, and I have just so much healing. I do initiate a quickening batch right at the end, just out of an abundance of caution, and that is Ashmal down. So close to the end, only a few bosses left to go. Next up is Gabranth, who I'm going to give as much attention as he deserves, and it's Dr. Sid time, who also immediately gets his butt kicked, but then summons Famfrit. I have to turn off Berserk and switch up my Gambit so I can actually target Famfrit instead of Sid. And Sid really loves to recast buffs on Famfrit, so Phon spends a decent chunk of the fight either renewing buffs or dispelling buffs. Then Famfrit goes down and it's time to change targets to Sid. I can re-enable my Berserk Gambit and Sid gets his butt kicked at record speed. And now it's time for the fun part. Beating Famfrit means one character can unlock Daggers 5, meaning I can finally have a real weapon. Time to do some brief testing, because daggers actually use strength and speed in their damage formula, so it's possible Phon deals more damage, and nope, Bosch still deals more damage. That's about what I expected. And choosing Bosch to wield the dagger provides a secondary benefit, in that because of Bosch's innate licenses, I can actually equip a platinum dagger and a shield. Not a good shield, but a shield. Well, that's actually all the prep I think I need. I'm pretty underleveled compared to a normal playthrough, but let's see what I can do to the final bosses. First up is Gabranth. He is considerably more dangerous in this rematch, as his combo potential is way higher. Unfortunately for him, I got daggers since our last encounter. I do still need to do a bit of a Rise Yo-Yo, but then a quickening sequence ends the fight. Then the first Vayne fight. Honestly, I think I spend more time watching mid-battle cutscenes than actually fighting here. The first phase of the final battle is never really that interesting. Arise also means my normal revive yo-yo is way more time efficient. Next up is the flying sword fight. The first portion of the fight is largely a confusing mess as I run around attacking seemingly random swords. Once those are neutralized, it's just Vayne to target, and wow, Bosch is dealing quite good damage. I mean, the per hit isn't exceptional, but given how fast he's attacking. And that's that. Time for the final sequence. And Vayne does not mess around. Most of his attacks in this phase can kill Ashe or Bosch with their low HP, particularly at my low level. And even outside his cutscene attacks, he deals very high damage. With a lot of Vayne's attacks dealing AoE damage, I actually turn off Von's attack gambits so I can more easily keep him away from everyone else. And while MP could be a concern, I have so many high ethers. Von is spending more time than I'd like doing nothing. Let's add Shell to his buff gambits, just to really amp up my defense. Okay, Bahamut's sword isn't a total party kill, so I definitely have a chance. I mean, it doesn't help that Vayne really does just kill everyone other than Phon in one hit. Good thing Arise exists. If I had to revive allies and heal them, I think this fight would be completely lost. There's perfect defense. Vayne is immune to all damage for a bit, but that does mean he is at 25% health already. Now, the question is, how will my party weather Terraflare? And the answer is not bad. I mean, it wasn't great, but 2 people survived. And there is one more sequence of Arise Yo-Yo, and there it is. Okay, well, that was Final Fantasy XII with only white mages. That was simultaneously much easier and much more tedious than I'd expected. I'll have to ruminate on that. I'll have more opinions to share in the summary video out next Friday. I did want to shout out that I do have a Patreon, linked in the description. I spend a lot of time making these videos, so if you enjoyed the video, want to support the channel, and are financially stable enough to do so, that exists. No pressure though, this channel is free to enjoy for everyone and will remain that way. For now, if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of this, feel free to subscribe. Hey, maybe leave a comment if you have something you'd like to say. But whatever you decide to do, have a safe trip home.